Fuck, it's windy. Fuck, man. God's not happy. He hasn't been happy with people recently. I'm gonna see if I can find a way to change that. I'm gonna see if I can find a way to help us help God be happy so He can help us live a good life. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to talk about a frame of reference, a political, philosophical frame of reference that I use when making moral decisions. Now, this is just going to be, I guess, a philosophy for dummies course taught by yours truly, another dummy. And we'll see how that works out. So if you already know the shit here, it's not going to mean anything. And if you disagree, please, God will be very happy. He will smile on you if you voice your irrelevant little concerns in the comments below. Irrelevant insect man. Let's see. Alright. Aristotle. He had to deal with these two competing schools of thought, which were relevant at the time, started by these pre-Socratic philosophers, before Socrates, before Plato. And one was from Elia, Italy, the Eleatic school, and that's where we get guys like Zeno, who was very famous for coming up with these paradoxes of motion, these paradoxes that supposedly disprove motion as a possibility. And also Parmenides, famous from the Eleatic school, he's got a Platonic dialogue where he basically schools young Socrates. So you have the Eleatic school versus, and that's in eastern Italy, across the Mediterranean on the other side. You have this other pre-Socratic philosopher, Heraclitus. And both, like Zeno and Heraclitus, there's fragments of their writing. It's very easy to find online, very accessible, worth looking up. But he's on the other side of the Mediterranean with the Ionian Greeks in what is modern-day Turkey. Now, Aristotle, he had to balance a juggling act between these two competing schools of thought, because the Eleatics thought that motion was not possible. They thought that it was illusory. Parmenides put forth this suggestion of the one, which would later be used by Christian apologists, theologians, as a defense or a proof for God. In particular, Plotinus would appropriate Parmenides' argument of the one. But essentially, they were saying everything is one. There isn't any change that's actual. And you have on the other side of things, you have Heraclitus, who says all is flux, everything flows, nothing ever stays the same. Now, Aristotle is wondering, like, there's got to be some kind of way to reconcile these two parties. And he does. He does this by suggesting that when we think of things, when we think of change, what's happening really is something that could potentially be the case, a kind of prefiguration for how reality could be, is just becoming actual. And forces, potency, work, energy, move in a certain direction that kind of, it's like I guess a set of lights, or a set of dominoes, where it's like actualizes a potential, which becomes the next actual, so on and so forth. And that line of reasoning will be used later by, famously, Thomas Aquinas for his unmoved mover argument as a defense for God. Now, why am I bringing this up? Why is Aristotle trying to prove that change is real politically relevant? Well, because it turns out you can use this line of reasoning where you treat the potential as something that is as real as the actual, at least insofar as a moral agent is concerned. That means you and me. For example, why I am pro-life is because that the potential human being I think of as just as real as the actualized human being. And if at any point during the stage of pregnancy you terminate, well, you murder the unborn child, that is essentially, the crime against the potential is just as real as the crime against the actual. And very often you'll have a pro-life or pro-choice. The mainstream discussion is, at what point in the pregnancy is it acceptable? Well, the fact of the matter is, at any point, starting with conception, the actualized human being is the end result. It's the end towards which, it's the telos, to use Aristotelian terms, towards which the organism is moving. And I mean, if you wanted to be logically consistent, I'm not going to make this whole video about pro-life versus pro-choice. I can make a separate video on that. But if you wanted to be logically consistent, and that's the key with a lot of these, the pro-choice arguments, is you follow the logical conclusion of their reasoning, and you see where it ends up. So it's like, okay, until the organism has finished developing. Let's say you only want to prioritize, you only place value on the actual and not the potential. If that is the case, the human brain doesn't stop developing until someone is 25 years old. I mean, that's a rough estimate. But given that, it's like, are you willing to say post-birth abortions are reasonable on people who are 25 years of age or older? Which is, I mean, we'll get there. We'll get there. Give it another 20 years, and that I'm sure that will be, the Overton window will have shifted to that point. But in like manner, if they want to argue about viability, usually the argument for viability is that the organism isn't providing any economic value. It's usually like a closeted economic argument. But as with, a corporation, the potential, that's what you invest in. A child is economically an investment. But I don't even think the economic argument should matter. Because insofar as at any stage in the pregnancy, the organism has the potential to be a fully formed human being, at least that's what it's striving towards, I would treat that as real as, say, the infant that is already born. And if at any point you disagree with any of this, blabber on. I'll tell you why you're wrong in the comments. The extension of that is, well, I'm also against the death penalty, which I've been told before is unbased or cringe. But the fact of the matter is, when I think of the state, why does the state exist? Well, the state, I think it should exist for the sake of its constituents. Who's gonna partake in a state that doesn't exist for the sake of them pursuing the good? Anyone? Oh, no one. Yep, yeah, nobody cares. In like manner, I think the state should exist for the sake of the potential good citizen, as well as the actualized one. And that goes for criminals. And the fact of the matter is, geez, I feel like such a fucking oomer. Taking the oomer pill, consumer pill. There's a quote from Lord of the Rings where essentially Gandalf is lecturing one of the fucking hobbits. He says something along the lines of, what is it? Many that live deserve death, and many that die deserve life. Do you have the power to give it to them? In like manner with the state, I think everyone pursues what they think is good. And this kind of prompts a discussion on the nature of evil, which I'll probably make a later video on, it being the privation of what is good. But in the same way, evil is not the natural. I refuse to believe that evil is the natural condition of man. I think that's just illogical. That doesn't make any sense. How can a natural state, natural disposition be evil? It can be cruel. It can be maybe sadistic, but perhaps we need to refine our conception of what evil is. And that's not to say that the state shouldn't punish or be cruel to prisoners, because I think, well, in order to discipline the mind in a way that is productive, you probably have to discipline the body first. And that kind of leads right into another way we can view this framework of the potential versus the actual. Free speech. My previous video was on if you're going to be a troll, you better be able to make sure the transgender person you're making fun of doesn't commit suicide right after that, because it is funny. I'm not gonna lie, I think it's very funny, but I would rather have a convert than a martyr for my enemy. And the fact of the matter is that when you act on behalf for the love of something someone could be, and I genuinely, I don't hate, I mean, there's no way I can prove this. People will dispute it. But love for what somebody could be often manifests as cruelty. But as long as you have the end good in mind, as long as you are provoking people to abandon identities that are evil, corrupted, degenerative, in pursuit of good ones, then I don't think that's true cruelty. Feel free to dispute me on that. In the same sense, now this is probably this is a hot take. I think the framework could also be used to justify ethno-nationalism. Not in the sense, because it takes away the idea that there is a inherent moral superiority to any given race. I mean, there's not one that is more loved by God necessarily, so much as your potentiality, your potentials, which dictate what a good life for you might be, your natural law, could very well differ. We wouldn't say that the natural law, you know, that the horse should live the life of the bee because it's more productive. No, they each has their own way of partaking in the good. And I think if a decent argument could be made that between ethnicities the natural law differs, or I guess the rules you should follow in order to live a good life differ to a substantial degree, then a forced mixed society is one that is to the detriment of all. It's not like, oh, white people are whatever white means. White people are better at building skyscrapers, so much as if you have, because I really don't care about the IQ argument. I don't care. I'm not claiming that African Americans, Native Americans, whatever, are lacking in some form of reason, so much as what is necessary for me to live a good life and what is necessary for a Slav to live a good life, or a Mediterranean, a Arab, a Mongol, etc., might not necessarily be the exact same. And if you have a society where everyone is attempting to pursue the best life per their natural law as possible, per what, if they're all trying to actualize the potential good, then it might conflict in little ways. So even if you could somehow conjure up a state that promoted perfect peace between all the ethnicities for the rest of time, I don't know if it would be worth it. I don't know if it would be worth it, simply because I don't think that would be a society in which every ethnicity is allowed to pursue the best life possible. And I guess this begs the question, it's like, okay, how do the differences manifest? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not wedded to this idea. It's just a hypothetical argument. I think it would manifest primarily in aesthetic differences. Music, art, I think that would be the most obvious one. But I'm not too convinced that aesthetic preferences are separable from moral ones. So I guess that's all to say, Aristotle is pretty much, he's the only homosexual I would ever bestow the title of honorary non-fag. Make of it what you will.